So the first item of how this actually translates is around how an organization nurtures a relationship with candidates. Our assumption is for most companies in most markets, potential pool of quality candidates for the core positions in that organization is limited and is, as we said, in general, in undersupply. If you find those candidates, you have to hold on to them. And holding on to them means managing a relationship with them and nurturing them so that the right timing comes, they will be relevant candidates. A lot of those candidates are people who you were candidates in the past, or people who are customers and partners. They're friends of employees, they're alumni of employees or former employees. They're candidates you've turned down or have rejected you. And since candidates, particularly millennials, are very open to make a job move, even if they're satisfied in their role, investing in nurturing a relationship with those people over time will ensure that when they're ready to make a move for the right job, you'll have them as potential candidates in your organization. And nurturing is something, customer nurturing is something that there's a lot of technology and capability and thought leadership that's been developed in the marketing and sales world. And we need to take a lot of those capabilities and ways of thinking about that have been developed in the marketing funnel and using them in the talent funnel. And how you nurture candidates by building a relationship with them, informing them about the organization, the opportunities, educating them about the market and the technology and the things you're doing, continuously involving them in things the company is doing. So for example, many companies today are trying to involve their customers and the public in designing their products, in crowdsourcing activities that help them become better at what they're doing, and providing feedback. They may be inviting the general public or specific people to hackathons to help them improve their products and services. Your candidate pool should be the primary group of people that you're investing in building that communication, ensuring that they're following you in social media, that you're educating them about the new cool things that you're doing as an organization, not only as customers, but particularly as if they're more aware of you and more involved in their relationship with you over time. There's a higher chance that when the right opportunity comes along, they'll be interested in applying to your organization. And we can dive into this very deeply, but this is something organizations need to learn how to invest in these processes. And there's a lot of automation to help do this, because obviously mass nurturing is not something you can do easily for a lot of candidates, and it requires having information and technology. A second item is around making the process easy. We talked around experience, how important ease is to that. And we know that when the candidates experience difficulty or effort within the process, they often stop the process. So designing the recruiting process, the application and the entire recruiting process for candidate ease and for simplicity is really critical. Candidates already today are applying very much on mobile devices, even to agree that millennials more and more will not consider your organization if they can't apply on mobile, because mobile is simple and easy and accessible. Candidates don't want to spend too much time on application, and if your application process takes more than 15 minutes, many of them will stop the application process in the middle. Unilever did an exercise where just by shortening the recruiting process significantly by 80%, they multiplied the number of candidates that went through the process without changing any other aspects of this, not the sourcing processes or their different sources of candidates. That means we all need to be thinking about how we're designing the process to make them quick, simple, easy. Those are critical. And when you look at many of the recruiting processes, they actually are not designed that way from the perspective of the candidate and what the candidate experiences in them. A third item is the way organizations view screening, and an understanding that screening now needs to be viewed as a mutual process and not a one-sided process. If we take dating, for instance, dating is a mutual process. Both sides one side need to be selecting their partner and want to decide if they want that partner, but on the other side need to impress that partner and need to be selling themselves as well. And we see in the change in the balance of power between employers and candidates that employers have to understand that it's at a minimum a balanced situation, if not one that actually the candidate has more power in it. And they need to be selling at least as much as they're assessing the other side. That's very difficult. In many of our clients, we're seeing that we're still teaching the recruiters and the hiring managers to be good assessors. We're still teaching the organizations how to be assessing the right things, asking the right questions, differentiate the best candidates from the less good ones. Just doing that really well is still something that's challenging many organizations. But now the challenge is even greater. In the short time you have in an interview, half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour, or in an assessment process, the recruiters and the hiring managers not only need to assess, but they actually also need to sell. And that is a very complicated challenge, which many hiring managers and recruiters are still challenged with. They need to sell the employer value proposition to the candidate. Many employers don't know the employer value proposition of the organization. Some organizations still don't have a clear value proposition. And even when they do, the employers, the recruiters or hiring managers need to spend time throughout the interview in selling that value proposition. But just knowing and selling the value proposition isn't enough. Recruiters and hiring managers need to know how to tailor this value proposition to the specific segment. If you're sitting with a millennial, you need to tell the story differently than when you're sitting with someone who's an X generation. If you're sitting with an engineer who may be looking for some kind aspects of your value proposition that may be very different in the way you deliver it than the way you deliver it to someone who may be coming in from sales and looking at other aspects of your value proposition. And different populations, we know, have very different drivers for what they see as a great place to work. And hiring managers and recruiters need to understand these differences between the different populations and know how to tailor the messages that they're giving around the organization to be attractive to each of these different populations. But that's not enough. If that isn't all difficult enough, recruiters and hiring managers need to be able to tailor the messages to the individual. Throughout the recruiting process, the organization needs to understand what the individual drivers, what this candidate is looking for at their future employer, what they see as the important aspects that are driving their career, and you need to be selling to those specific individual drivers. And that requires time and investment that all has to fit into this very, very short time, making this all very challenging. And this can affect even as much as simple things like the way you design your interview summary or the forms that the organization does. We're always used to asking about what the candidate's strengths are and what the candidate weaknesses or your concerns are about them, looking at different, maybe scoring a number of competencies that are important, or writing about the skills and experiences a candidate have. But if we take this area of this mutual selection, now the company not only needs to ask, but actually think about in your questionnaire, in the summary of interviews, being asked questions of the candidate and their motivations for this specific organization, this specific role, so you can use that information to sell to the candidate. So for instance, maybe in the application form, there'd be questions about what do you find exciting about this role? Knowing that can help the company address those specific areas and sell to them. Or for instance, in the interview summary, company may ask a number of questions so that interviewers are asking these questions and summarizing them around, for instance, what is this candidate, how close is a candidate to making a decision? How positive? What do we understand his or her concerns are? What are the things that excite them the most? And we could use those to convince them to stay, to decide to accept our offer once we decide to make it, or if we decide to make it. And these are all very different things than many organizations are doing today, and will help organizations deal with the fact that they also need to sell and not just need to assess. A fourth area which we find needs to change in this balance of power is the way organizations assess candidates. Many organizations are using different forms of assessment to decide whether the candidates are the right candidates or not. And those assessments absolutely need to be valid. So you need to be assessed. You're using tools that actually provide a valid answer whether those candidates are the right ones and have the right skills and capabilities for what you're looking for the job. So content validity continues to be really critical when you're selecting assessment tools. But today, with this change in balance of power, we need to look at three additional aspects of the assessment process. One is the process needs to be engaging. Candidates will leave the process in the middle, will be very frustrated when the way the assessments are designed are not engaging or not fun. And that's where we're seeing organizations use great technology, gamification, things that make the process itself not tedious and annoying, but actually enjoyable to a degree. Of course, this is tests, and often representative of the kind of things that candidates will see as relating to the company. You can sell the company products doing this and other things as you're engaging the candidates. Second thing is a face validity. So face validity is whether the candidates, who may not be organizational psychologists and experts in assessment, whether they view the assessment process as valid. They don't have psychological tools to know whether they're valid or not, but they get a sense from the way the activities that they do, whether they think that this is a tool that assesses them. When they do work that's similar to the work they expect to be doing, when they do exercises that they understand how they test the things that they'll be required to do in their job, then they understand that that is an acceptable or face valid tool to use. When they do things that they don't understand the connection between those tests and the work that they'll be required of them, they feel very frustrated that they're spending the time doing that. And that's the importance of face of validity in the assessment process. And the third, which we're seeing very critical today, is whether the candidates get valuable feedback out of the process. So if the organization gets information out of the process only, and the candidate walks away not knowing anything about how they scored, what the organization learned, what they're good at or bad at, they feel very frustrated that they spent a lot of time and got very little value. But if the organization is using good, valid tools, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to provide at least some feedback about what candidate get. Just like a child gets feedback in their school about the score they got on the test and what they did well and not well. And that is valuable to the candidate regardless of whether they get accepted to the organization or not, or whether they choose to go to it, because they receive personal value in the process because when they invested time in it. So when designing assessment processes, we need to take into account many different things that we may have ignored in the past or not taken into account. A fifth area is critical and covers all of these and across the entire process is the way we communicate. Many of the candidates who had a bad experience relate it to poor communication throughout the process. Communication is a lot of what the candidates experience throughout the process and expect to know what's going on. And candidates are very frustrated when they don't understand where they stand in the process, how they're doing, what the next steps are. Candidates want to see the recruiting process like the map on the right. They want to understand the entire journey. They want to understand, even in the beginning, where they're going, what's going to happen, how long it's going to take, what the different steps are going to be, and at any given time know exactly where they are along that path. What many companies do is they only give the candidates a very narrow picture of what's going on. They understand what they've done so far, and they may know what the next step is or maybe not know what the next step is. That's a very limited view and is not enough for the candidates to feel that they understand where they are and feel a sense of control in the process. We've gotten used to a world in the consumer world where we know where our pizza is between when we made the call or went online to order the pizza and when we get it. We know that that the order was placed. We know that it's being made. We know that it was put in the oven. We know that it came out of the oven, is cooling, that it's already on the way over, where it is along the way, and until we hear the knock on the door. When we order something from Amazon, we know exactly what step it is. When at any given time, we know when to expect it. Deciding to work for a company, apply to a company, is a much, much bigger decision than buying a pizza or ordering some clothes on Amazon. Shouldn't candidates expect to have at least as much information about where they are in the process that they do around some basic consumer things that they do every day? Most companies are not there yet in their ability and their understanding of the importance of communicating it all the time throughout the process exactly where the candidates are. An excellent communication really, really works. So this is a real posting of a candidate who was applied to Unilever, and as you can see, he did not receive an offer. So this is a candidate who had a positive experience, although he did not receive an offer from Unilever in the process. And look what he wrote. I applied online. I interviewed at Unilever. The process starts with uploading resume, then playing a series of 12 games, and then onto a digital interview. It was a good process. Get feedback to you very quickly, provide a lot of feedback along the way. So many of the things we just talked about, communication obviously along the way, but games, played a series of 12 games, got back to you very quickly, a lot of feedback along the way. So the assessment was engaging, feedback was accepted and communication happened all along the way. And even though the person was accepted, they had a positive experience. They went on Glassdoor, invested the time to write this review. And if there's an opportunity in the future at Unilever, I am positive that this candidate will be interested in applying again. And one of the important things that now summarizes all this is that we need to measure different things in the process, given that we want to focus on employee experience. Many companies feel that they're doing a good job with managing their candidate experience, but very few of them are actually managing and measuring what they're doing around this. And so when we look at measurement, companies not only need to continue to do the classic things they've been doing, they need to add new kinds of measures. So companies still need to continue to manage their cycle time, their cost per hire, the effectiveness of different recruiting sourcing. Companies still need to continue to manage and measure their cycle time, their cost per hire, the effectiveness of different sources of candidates, the acceptance rates of candidates, the quality of hire, and many other classic recruiting metrics. But when we look at candidate experience, we need to manage and measure new things. Look at touch points with candidates, the number and the frequency of events that the candidate has with the organization. Have less events at a higher frequency. That will affect the candidate's cycle time. Measuring the position cycle time is not the same as managing the candidate cycle time, and we need to look at the experience of each candidate having a short time in the process. We need to look at whether our candidates are engaging with us more actively in social media and other areas as an indication of their experience that they have with us as an organization. And we need to collect feedback from candidates about the process. Candidates who have a bad experience, a lot of that is also because they were never asked to provide feedback. If they were given the opportunity to provide feedback about the process they're experiencing, some of that frustration would have been relieved through the ability to provide feedback. And organizations today, the leading organizations, ask for feedback from the candidate throughout the process, understanding that regardless of whether they get accepted or not, the way they experience the process is important for the organization to learn. And when candidates are engaged in providing feedback, they're also going to be more engaged with the organization, have a more positive experience. And maybe a great example that summarizes many of the things that we talked about in this session is a short film by L'Oreal, which is a recruiting film, but it looks at, it understands that the candidate, employee, but also customer, actually one person. The organization needs to be looking at how it designs one seamless experience for customers, candidates, and employees, and take the way that the organization thinks about customer experience and implement it in candidate experience and eventually into employee experience as well.